Welcome to this episode of the Sports Detective Podcast Show. My name is James Williams, and today Bryce Young might be the biggest NFL quarterback bust of all time. In case you guys haven't heard the news, Bryce Young has been benched by the Carolina Panthers for their Week 3 matchup against the Las Vegas Raiders in favor of Andy Dalton that is going to be taking his spot. This is coming after the Carolina Panthers started off 0-2 and got absolutely dominated by the New Orleans Saints and the Los Angeles Chargers. And we kind of thought that the Carolina Panthers this season, no one was really thinking high hopes for them, but we were thinking, hey, they went this offseason and they got a new coach. They added some offensive line help. They added some offensive skill position help. We might see a better version of Bryce Young in year 2 than we saw in year 1. Well, so far, it has looked just as bad as it was last year for Bryce Young, if not worse. And we're going to get into some of those stats and just talk about how bad Bryce Young has been as the quarterback of the Carolina Panthers here in a little bit. But you guys are probably thinking this too, like, wow, this is a decision. How did they decide to make the decision this early into the season? We're only in week 3. Why did they decide to make this decision? Well, I'm going to show you guys this clip here from Adam Schefter. He was on Monday Night Countdown talking about this, and he gave some very interesting insight to why the Panthers ultimately decide to make this decision. So I'll go ahead and play this clip, and we'll come back on the other side and discuss.
If you saw Bryce Young the first week of the season with Dave Canales on the bench, he looked like a broken quarterback. His play has not improved. Clearly, the team did not feel like he could win with him, and it moved in a different direction today. This represents, I believe, the fastest that we've ever seen a former #1 overall pick at quarterback benched 2 games into his second season. And keep in mind, Laura, that the Chicago Bears still own the Panthers' second-round pick in 2025, which looks like it could be at the top of the second round.
Wow. So the part of that sticks out to me the most is that part that he said at the beginning. Bryce Young looked like a broken quarterback. Again, Adam Schefter is not some sort of opinionist. He's not going to go into First Take and be like, here's my top 5 quarterbacks and why, or here's this crazy take I'm going to launch off here about the NFL. No. He's an NFL insider. His job is to know kind of a lot of the behind the scenes stuff that's going on with all these programs and tell the things that he can to us, right? So the reason he's saying that Bryce Young looked like a broken quarterback, somebody or multiple somebodies in the Panthers told Adam Schefter that. So I think that is incredibly telling here, that it's basically like, hey, like, this dude's broken. He's completely lost confidence in himself. He's completely not mentally there to be an effective NFL quarterback right now, and maybe ever, if we're reading into that a little bit more. So that is an incredibly telling quote there from Adam Schefter. And we're going to get into some of those stats with Bryce Young and talk about, maybe where people missed on him here in a little bit. But I do want to talk about this narrative of the Carolina Panthers where it's like, oh my God, they are this terribly dysfunctional franchise and they put him in this terrible position for him to fail. And that's why Bryce Young has been so bad for the Carolina Panthers. I do think a lot of that is true. I think that the narrative for that is true. They gave up a bunch of stuff to get him, and they put him in this situation with Frank Wright, who didn't necessarily want him to be the quarterback. He wanted CJ Stroud over Bryce Young, and Frank Wright also might not be that good of a coach. The roster was absolutely horrible, and Bryce Young was not put in this position to succeed. With that being said, though, other quarterbacks have been drafted into bad positions where they shouldn't be able to, where they're in poor positions to succeed, and quarterbacks will be drafted into other bad situations where they cannot succeed. Okay, that is going to be something that is going to happen for the entire history of the NFL, right? With that being said, though, if you go back to the 2023 NFL draft, people really weren't talking about how bad of a pick Bryce Young was. That wasn't the narrative. Now, you had your people that thought CJ Stroud was better than Bryce Young, but even those people weren't like, hey, CJ Stroud is better and Bryce Young's going to be a complete, absolute bust. That wasn't the narrative what was going on. If anything, people thought that, like, the Houston Texans at that time were the dysfunctional franchise with the meddling owner. You might have also thought that about the Carolina Panthers, but we also thought about that about the Houston Texans. If you guys remember, at the time of that draft, the owner wanted a quarterback. He wanted CJ Stroud for the Houston Texans. And basically, the front office of Houston was like, oh, we're not the most sold on CJ Stroud, but we know this Will Anderson guy is going to be great. We want to draft him. So it was a little bit of a organizational divide of like, should we get Stroud or should we get Anderson? Well, they basically made a compromise like, hey, take CJ Stroud and then we'll trade up and give up, a future first round pick in the 2024 draft for Will Anderson. And at that time, everyone absolutely crushed them. Absolutely crushed them. Well, it turns out that was the right decision because Will Anderson is awesome. CJ Stroud turned out to be amazing. And then D'Amico Ryans became an awesome NFL head coach because that's the other part of this too. CJ Stroud was going into a situation where the Texans had 4 different head coaches in 4 years. Functional franchises, well-run franchises aren't like that. So I don't necessarily know if I want to hear the excuse of like, oh my God, like he was drafted into this poor situation because we kind of thought CJ Stroud was going to be drafted to a poor situation anyway. Now, obviously, it turned out Bryce Young was in a way worse situation than CJ Stroud, but in the moment, we thought CJ Stroud wasn't going to a good situation. So I wanted to point that out here. And now let's get into this is kind of going to be a combination of sad Panthers stats, and it's also going to be a combination of a sad Bryce Young stat. So I have been basically bookmarking tweets here on Twitter of sad Bryce Young stats. So we're going to kind of just, power through a bunch of these here because some of these stats are like, because you might be wondering like, hey, how bad is this situation? And it's very rough. He's an all-time poorly performing rookie quarterback, and we're going to dive into some of that stuff here. So I got a few tweets from this guy named David Newton. He's an ESPN reporter covering the Panthers. Dating back to last season, the Panthers have scored 13 points in their last 4 games. That is the fewest points over a 4-game span by any team since the 1998 Eagles, and tied for the fewest points over a 4-game span by any team since 1980. And guys, we are playing in the offensive powered 2020 year of 2024. That is absolutely. Now, I forgot that they got shut out in the last 2 games of the season last year. That was kind of, I completely forgot about that because they obviously got 10 points week 1 and then 3 points week 2. Bryce Young's total QBR after 2 games is a dreadful 8.9, last in the NFL by a mile. Next closest to the Panthers is second-year quarterback Chicago's Caleb Williams at 23.9. So he has just been. It's not even like that he's bad. He's the worst in the league by a mile there. We mentioned this a little bit earlier. There was this belief that's like, oh my God, Bryce Young is, whatever quarterback that you put back there is just going to get absolutely destroyed. And I think that was the case last year. But according to Pro Football Focus, after ranking 27th last year, the Panthers have the 5th best Pro Football Focus pass blocking grade. That is the most concerning part of Bryce Young's regression. So even if you think the PFF thing's kind of BS and those grades, aren't necessarily 100% accurate, and maybe they're not the 5th best this year, whatever this means, though, is that the line still has significantly improved. All right, so this is Chase Daniel here. I guess he does like YouTube like quarterback breakdowns now. I guess that's what Chase Daniel does. The former perennial backup quarterback. He's doing this is like an 18-minute breakdown here. We're not going to watch that, but Chase Daniel here tweets, Bryce Young benched. Why? Film don't lie. He's struggling with seeing the field, and his footwork is not where it should be. There are plays wide open, all 22 QB breakdown of Bryce Young. So Chase Daniel, though, again, we're not going to watch the video, basically saying like hey, this offense is working. He's just does not have good footwork, and he's missing players on throws, right? So that's not a good sign. This is a sad Panthers stat. There are 13 points through 2 weeks. The first 2 weeks of an NFL season is the lowest in team history, and their defense has allowed 73 points through the first 2 weeks. That is the most in team history. This is a sign in Charlotte, I'm guessing, where this is like basically saying Baker Mayfield 2-0, Sam Darnold 2-0, Matt Rule 3-0, and then Bryce Young 0-2. Basically, everyone leaves the Panthers, and then they have success. It's almost like you go there and you are cursed while you are playing or coaching for the Carolina Panthers. Panthers QB Bryce Young is the 3rd player in the last 20 seasons to average 4 or fewer yards per dropback and 4 straight starts, minimum 20 dropbacks in each game. The other 2 are David Carr and Jamarcus Russell, both of whom were also number 1 picks and also legendary busts. I was actually looking through David Carr's stuff last night, and I noticed that he actually wasn't that much of a disaster. Like, he wasn't good, but he wasn't like Jamarcus Russell was out of the league in like 2.5 years, and Bryce Young might be on that way too. Um, okay, the Panthers are officially the worst team in NFL since David Tepper purchased the team in 2018. The Panthers are 31-70. That is a .307 winning percentage since Tepper took over. The loss today, coupled with the Jets' win, makes that the worst record in the NFL over that span. Uh, this is Sunday. Career lows for Bryce Young, negative .69 EPA per dropback, 3.2 yards per attempt, 3.0 average depth of target, and 84 passing yards. These are just depressing stats. The Panthers are the first team to have zero passing TDs and throw for less than 150 yards in 4 straight games since the 2009 Raiders. Jamarcus Russell started all those games for the Raiders. Oh boy. Oh boy. You are in a lot of stats there where it's like, hey, the all-time worst quarterback performances, and you're in the same sentences with Jamarcus Russell, who was not trying at the quarterback position. That was his biggest knob. He had all of the talent in the world, did not want to put in the work, did not want to become a good NFL quarterback. So the fact that Bryce Young is in those same statistical categories with Jamarcus Russell is absolutely terrible news if you are the Carolina Panthers that gave up a lot for Bryce Young and, you know, obviously wanted him to succeed. Because I think if you're talking about I think just looking at some of those stats and stuff like that, like he's lost, and we were talking about that stuff at the beginning where it's like he's broken. He's lost all of his confidence mentally. He's lost all of it. Like, I think he's rushing, I think he's pressing, and I think there's just this added pressure to him right now, because not just the fact that you were drafted number 1, not just the fact that the Panthers gave up all of this stuff to trade up to get you, but the fact that the stuff that they traded up to get you became Caleb Williams, the fact that they picked you over CJ Stroud. I think there's just a lot of additional added pressure to Bryce Young that a lot of other quarterbacks probably wouldn't have, and might not be asked to like prove that they are like, an awesome franchise quarterback right away. Like, if Anthony Richardson kind of keeps going up and down, like, the Colts are going to keep giving him more chances, right? But this Bryce Young situation is in completely dire it's completely in a downright spiral at this point right now, and this might be the rock bottom of all of it. But I want to go back in time, and I want to talk about Bryce Young and the decision to draft him, because I think we're looking at this situation. I think we're going to look at this in 20 years, because if this is it for Bryce Young and he never has a legit chance to become a starting quarterback in the NFL again, he's going to go down as one of the biggest busts in NFL history. But I think we're going to look back on that. We're going to be like, wait a minute, this guy that's like 5'10", like 180 pounds, they took him over CJ Stroud, who's like 6'4", can make all the throws, athletic. Like what happened here? How did we miss this badly on Bryce Young? How did everyone miss this badly on this? Because even if you go back in time and like the Panthers take CJ Stroud, I don't know if the Texans take Bryce Young, but Bryce Young's going pretty high in that draft. It's not like he would have went in the 3rd round or something like that. No. This guy was a solid prospect coming out of college, right? And if you look at his background, this dude was a 5-star kid coming out of high school, started at Alabama as a freshman, won a Heisman. And if you just look at all of those things like that, and you're projecting this guy like as an NFL quarterback, just knowing those facts, not knowing anything else about the dude, you're like, hey, this dude should probably be drafted pretty high, and he should probably be an effective NFL player, right? Well, let's go back, because Bryce Young is a short, small NFL quarterback. He looks incredibly small on the field, and I think that is the biggest reason he has not been succeeding so far on the NFL level. Well, the reason that the Panthers and probably other teams would have felt comfortable taking him pretty high is because over the last 10, 15 years, we have had an incredible amount of successful short NFL quarterbacks. I wrote down 5 here that are like pretty notable. Drew Brees, obviously, very small quarterback, is one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time, and never won MVP, won a Super Bowl. He's going to make the Hall of Fame one day. Russell Wilson, won a Super Bowl, probably going to make the Hall of Fame, one of the better quarterbacks in the NFL for more than a decade. Baker Mayfield, first round pick, Heisman Trophy. He's 2-0 right now for the Bucs. He's won a few playoff games in his career. Also a very short guy, about 6 feet tall. Kyler Murray, he's like 5'10". He had the best week of any quarterback this past Sunday. And then Tua. I don't know if we put Tua here. He might be a little bit taller than all these guys. But if you're looking at that 6 foot tall guys and below, those are kind of like the 5 guys there that you look at and you're like, okay, well, at least all of these guys had at least some degrees of success in the NFL. So you look at that and you're like, oh, okay, maybe we do take a shot on Bryce Young here. But the biggest difference between all 5 of those guys and Bryce Young, and we didn't notice this at the time, and we probably didn't think it mattered that much, is if you look at Drew Brees, for example, this dude is one of the most accurate passers of the football in NFL history. This dude literally, there was like a ESPN sports science thing once upon a time, and they Drew Brees test his throwing accuracy versus like a professional like bow and arrow archer, and Drew Brees was more accurate than like the person with a bow and arrow. That is how accurate Drew Brees is throwing the football. Russell Wilson, when he came on the scene in Seattle, he was the smaller quarterback, and he was pretty athletic and mobile, and he was this really good play extender and improvisationalist, and that made Russell Wilson like one of the better top 10 quarterback for the better part of a decade. And he was probably one of the top 5 dual threat quarterbacks in the NFL for at least a better part of a decade. So him just having that unique skill set compared to like a bunch of guys like Matt Ryan in the NFL. No shade on Matt Ryan. He was an awesome quarterback for a long time too. But the fact that Russell Wilson was super mobile made him be able to be successful with his smaller size. Baker, similarly to Drew Brees, is an incredibly accurate quarterback. The dude also is not scared of anything. He stands in the pocket. He has an incredible pocket presence, and he's maybe a little bit more elusive than people think, but Baker is also an incredibly accurate quarterback. Kyler Murray, do I need to tell you his incredible skill set? I think he is one of the best arms in the NFL. He also has like a 4.3 speed. So he's kind of like Russell Wilson on steroids to a degree, which sounds kind of crazy with how accomplished Russell Wilson is. And then Tua, say whatever you want about Tua, but the dude did lead the NFL in passing yards last year. Mike McDaniel found like the best thing that he can do, the most successful thing he can do, which is basically playing on time, playing in rhythm, and then, playing with precision and accuracy. And Tua did lead the NFL in passing yards, did help the Dolphins make the playoffs for a few years in a row. So, again, maybe you don't like Tua, maybe you don't think he's that good. He still has proven that he's not a bust. Versus here, and the difference between all of those guys, and the reason I point out those things to all those guys, Bryce Young doesn't have anything like that. He doesn't have elite athleticism that he can fall back on. He doesn't have an elite arm that he can fall back on. He has a good enough arm to make all of the throws. I was going back and reading some draft profiles about him, and it was like, hey, doesn't have a great arm, but he's decent enough to make all of the throws. He's an athletic guy, can extend plays, but he's not like Lamar Jackson running the ball, or he's not Jalen Hurts running the ball. So if you're just kind of like average arm, average athleticism, and you have incredibly unique size in the fact that you were so small, because that's the thing too with Bryce Young compared to all of those other guys I just mentioned, he's smaller than all of them. He's smaller than all of them, and he was put into this terrible situation with Carolina. So that is the biggest reason here, guys. He just has no physical traits that really stand out to you. When people were talking about him going number 1 overall or being a good quarterback prospect, it was his processing. It was him at the line of scrimmage. It was him being able to read and react to a defense. And we just have not seen that at all in the NFL. And he looks small out there. Doesn't seem like he can see over the line. And he doesn't have an arm that can, really back up, that can really help him out a lot. And then he doesn't have the athleticism to bail him out in certain situations. So if you're just looking at this, I know I'm going on here for a long time here. This dude if this is it for Bryce Young, if this is it for him, he is going down as like maybe 1A, 1B biggest quarterback bust of all time for number 1 overall picks. It's that bad. It's that bad. We read the stats. We went over his physical stuff. It's really bad for Bryce Young here. The one bright side for Bryce Young is maybe the Panthers are just that much of a tire fire dumpster, burning dumpster full of, dirty diapers, that if Bryce Young had a chance to go to some sort of like a Shanahan offense or a quasi Andy Reid offense or something like that, where there is actually a smart organization that has good talent around him and amazing coaching. Maybe then he could succeed as an NFL quarterback. But I don't know what team, after seeing what we have seen so far in his career, would be like, hey, next year we'll trade like the Steelers, how they like went and got Justin Fields. I don't know what team would be like, yeah, we'll give Bryce Young a shot at being a starter. I don't know what team that would be. And that's pretty sad because he was a fun quarterback in college. I think he's a good kid. He's not a Jamarcus Russell that doesn't care. I think Bryce Young really cares and wants to be good. It just doesn't seem like, for whatever reasons, because of physical stature and the lack of help at times around him at Carolina, and probably just last year just being might have just been such a scarring, jarring experience for him that he might be unsalvageable. And that's very sad because I do think he's a good kid. So there you have it, guys. That's going to do it for this episode here today. If you liked what you saw here today, please hit that like button if you haven't done so already, and subscribe if you haven't done so already. That is the number one thing that you can do to help support this show, and it costs you absolutely $0. So if you do that stuff, I will love you forever. And feel free to leave a comment too. What do you think about Bryce Young, his time at Carolina, and where you would maybe rank him again if this is it, of busts all time, because this is a very sad situation, and Panther fans sound off too. I want to know what Panther fans have to think about this and the situation. Bryce Young, David Tepper, the coaching, the surrounding support around Bryce Young. I want to know all of that stuff. So please sound off in the comments. And thank you very much for watching. We'll talk to you next time.